22-year-old Benedict Allen has always been a dreamer, and he's living his biggest dream yet. He's following in his father's footsteps and becoming an adventurer.
My dad was a test pilot, and it was very exciting having this glamorous father. He used to fly these planes over the house. And I just assumed that one day I'd be an adventurer of some sort, just like my dad. I just wanted to be like one of those great explorers like Cook or H.M. Stanley or Livingstone.
And for his first expedition, Benedict has come to the greatest wilderness on Earth, the mighty Amazon rainforest.
As a child, I read in my books about El Dorado, which was this mythical land of gold. But no one found El Dorado, and I thought one day that would be my destiny.
His companion for this epic journey is a stray dog he's befriended along the way.
I was lonely, and that dog reminded me of my dogs at home. And I called him Kashu, which was Indian for dog. So he was simply dog to me. But he began to be more than a dog, he began to be my friend.
Despite his youthful enthusiasm, this is Benedict's first major adventure. He's attempting to traverse over 1,000 miles of dense, uncharted rainforest. So he's relying heavily on 2 local guides to help him survive.
They taught me how to feel comfortable in the forest, which to me was a confusing place. They began to show me what I could eat and what I had to avoid, how to hunt. I was utterly dependent on these 2 men and their extraordinary library of knowledge, because I knew nothing, absolutely nothing.
For 3 months, they head deeper into the vast rainforest and are nearing the supposed location of El Dorado, the city of gold. But Benedict has been warned of the dangerous illegal miners that have been drawn here. And there are troubling indications that they are not alone.
Signs were ominous from the beginning. The water, just empty cachaça bottles. Cachaça is a sort of cheap rum. There was a sense that there were outsiders in the forest. I'd been warned that these were bank robbers, thieves, people accused of murder. They'd all headed off into the forest because here was a chance of making a quick buck.
Despite Benedict's trepidation, they must find a place to camp as night is falling.
We went off through the trees, and suddenly we stumbled across this small settlement. But whereas I was worried, my 2 Indian guides were absolutely entranced. I remember one of the Indian guides picking up a can opener and wondering what that was. Suddenly, this character, Mendez, arrived. He was the classic gold miner. And I just felt I've got to get out of here.
¿Qué estás haciendo aquí, entonces?
Estamos buscando El Dorado.
¿El Dorado?
Estamos viajando al sur por la boca del Amazon.
No, mi amigo. Si viajas para allá, muy peligroso. Los rápidos están lucidos, pero puede ayudarte.
Mendes said to me, look, I'll be your guide. I'll take you down the river towards El Dorado. Furthermore, I know a track. You'll be able to walk from the river to the outside world.
¿Está bien? Divertimos.
And I thought, well, maybe I've misjudged this gold miner. Maybe he isn't that bad. But I thought I should go along with this plan. I'll be heading in the right direction at least.
Bien.
Benedict reluctantly agrees to the offer and settles down for the night. But as the night wears on, he has a growing sense that all is not what it seems.
That night, I woke up in my hammock feeling that something was wrong. Just an uneasy feeling, and I remember thinking, I've got to check on things. So I put on my boots, potted down to the river to see if my canoe was still there, see my supplies were there. I think effectively I was making sure that my exit was okay. And I heard this conversation going on between Eduardo and Mendes, and they were discussing me. They were saying, why don't we go and slit his throat right now?
Porque no rajamos la garganta ahora.
Los indios que tendrán problemas si lo matamos.
No. A ellos le dan igual.
I had a rising sense of fear, and adrenaline began thumping in my ears.
Venga. Lo haceros ahora.
¿Quién va a ser?
No lo haré. Cuando está durmiendo.
And I realized I'm just going to be killed. These are my last moments alive. I just thought, go, I have to run, get out of here. Gathered my hammock together, my mosquito net, ran to the canoe. And suddenly, I was in the darkness in my canoe with my dog.
And with his loyal friend Cashew, Benedict makes it away from danger.
My first thought was relief. Then I had this terrible, dawning realization that I wasn't safe at all. I was surrounded by forest. It was the middle of the night, and I was very, very alone.
Without his guides, Benedict is now stranded in over 2 million square miles of rainforest, with no one to show him the route out.
I really was not at the end of a nightmare, but at the beginning of one.
Cashew. Let's get out of here, boy.
I paddled upriver for maybe an hour, and I thought, I'll just calm down, I'll just pull into the side. Made a little camp and thought, I've got to come to terms with this new situation. And the situation was, my childhood dreams were over. And I felt, I've got to get out of here, got to get out of here. And there was blood pounding through my head. I did not know what was out there in the forest. And I didn't know myself, really. I didn't know whether I had it in me to survive. The big question mark was how long I could keep on going. And it wasn't that I was running out of food, I was just running out of belief in myself.
By mid-afternoon, it seems Benedict and Cashew have cleared the worst of the rapids. They can now continue to search for a way out of the forest.
I remember starting to paddle my way into the clear water, but I hadn't quite got far enough. Suddenly I found the situation out of control. I started going backwards. It became absolutely terrifying. I realised that I was fighting for my survival. I had to keep this canoe upright. But then, wham! The canoe shattered with the impact. Everything now ended up in the water. The dog, the supplies, and me. It was a moment of absolute terror as I realised not only was I losing my possessions, but actually I was having to fight for my life. I was gagging on the water, trying to get my breath. Finally got some purchase and waded my way towards the riverbank. I remember just trying to take in the situation, and the situation was that I'd lost virtually everything I needed in order to survive, and lost my companionship, Cashew, the dog.
For hours, Benedict fights his way through the jungle. But as night falls, he can go no further. And when the sun goes down, the searing temperatures plummet. So he makes a shelter, using a technique he learned from his guides.
I thought, oh, it doesn't look too bad, really. I felt a little bit of pride. And then lay down and realised that I was wet. There's more dampness coming up from the ground. I lay there, sweating away, and then felt incredibly cold.
The brutal reality is that Benedict isn't prepared for this at all. In the 100% humidity, he has no way of keeping dry or warm. And with his mosquito net gone, no way to protect himself against the deadly disease he fears the most, malaria.
Then the insects started moving in, and a long night began. I was feeling absolutely terrible, wrung out, because I'd been awake all night with the insects. And I had to light a fire and dry out my clothes just to fend off this clawing wetness which wore you down. I felt very burdened by the forest. I just thought, I've got to get out. I've got to get out of this place.
Benedict resumes his hike towards the outside world, but so far has only managed 4 of the 100 miles he has to traverse. It's been 4 days since he last ate, and he's beginning to weaken.
I was starting to feel hunger pains. And I knew that unless I sorted out some sort of way of getting food, I was just going to die of starvation. I started to think how I could get nourishment from this place that seemed intent on killing me. So I thought, okay, I've got to settle myself down and build a few traps.
And Benedict knows that if you want to trap an animal, you have to find its trail.
Make 2 parallel lines of sticks that you jab into the forest floor, and you funnel the mouse along. And there's a little bit of bait that you put at the end, and it triggers a mechanism, and boom, a log comes down and flattens the mouse, and you get this flat rodent for your supper. It's so time-consuming to even fashion these things, but waiting for an animal to come along, I found absolutely exasperating. I thought, I'm totally incompetent here. I don't belong in the forest, and furthermore, the forest seems to know it. It's almost like I'd been found out. Every species here has learned to survive, and those that aren't good enough die. And I'm going to be next, because I don't know how to cope here. I can't even make a simple trap.
Benedict has managed to fight his way through 25 miles of jungle, a mere quarter of the distance he believes he needs to travel to reach the outside world. The only food he's eaten are the tips of ferns, but it's not enough, and he's beginning to experience the first effects of starvation.
My hunger was really bad. I felt weak. I was doing less and less miles every day and feeling more and more confused.
And weakened by hunger, his body is becoming too frail to withstand the jungle's constant onslaught.
Insects were more of a problem, and so were the bites. Some of them were starting to fester and weep. All of this was sort of visible evidence that I was being attacked. And suddenly, there was a palm tree. It was a malaria palm. And I remembered how my guides had taken the berries and they'd made a wonderful purple mush. Suddenly I had all the energy in the world because I saw hope now. I drank down this wonderful, nutritious liquid. God, it felt so good to have my stomach full.
Benedict is so weak that his stomach is unable to digest this rich berry pulp. And as starvation takes a stranglehold, his body is beginning to break down.
It was a terrible situation because on the one hand, I could eat, but if I did eat, I'd feel more sick. It didn't seem to be solving any problem, and it was a sort of hellish situation. When I thought it couldn't get any worse, it did get worse. I lay on the forest floor, racked by pain. My liver, my kidneys were being attacked. I was fighting just to keep myself sane.
Benedict's malaria has now reached the final and fatal stage. The parasites are aggressively multiplying and destroying his vital organs. causing his body to collapse. Within 24 hours, he will experience first coma, then death.
This was the moment when it could all end very, very quickly. I had this rising sense of panic that I had to get out of the forest. I had to do whatever it took. Whatever happened, I had to keep moving. Keep on putting one foot in front of the other. I kept on going, making pitiful progress, and sometimes no progress at all. I couldn't even think straight. I couldn't even see my compass. At that moment, I suddenly thought, well, I'm just never going to get out of here. It was just too big to fight, and I was losing that fight.
Benedict simply cannot go on. He's just too weak, too ravaged by disease.
It was a terribly lonely moment, thinking this is the end. And suddenly, amongst all this despair, this confusion, this feeling of being trapped in this prison, a sight that will always stay with me. I saw this cut branch. The cut itself was blackened, so it had been cut some time ago, but had been cut by a human. I realised there was actually quite a few of these branches. This was actually the edge of the outside world. I started investigating, and there was a trail. And then the extraordinary thing of just seeing daylight, and it's still emotional to me, just this reconnection with the outside world. The one thing I've been looking forward to, praying for, imagining, was suddenly there, and it was absolutely overwhelming. And I found myself in the back of a garden. There, ahead of me, was a little hut, and there was a little man in front. And he was just standing there with a look, not of welcome, but of horror. And that was my last memory.
Having recognized the symptoms of malaria, the farmer nursed Benedict for 3 days before he was driven to a hospital in Macapá, where he made a full recovery. Benedict returned home to be reunited with his parents 1 week later.
My life was never the same again.
And Benedict has been exploring the world ever since, fulfilling his dreams of becoming a renowned adventurer, just like his father.
I've been going off to the jungle, going off to the desert, going off to the Arctic, pushing myself to the limit, trying to touch that experience that I had that was so profound. That has always haunted me, and it's something that'll always be with me, and it's steered the rest of my life.
25-year-old Linda Scavana is preparing to set off on an epic solo driving trip.
I had 3 weeks vacation from work. It was definitely an escape, just a time to get away from the stresses of everyday life.
A student nurse from Pittsburgh, Linda is heading off across the length of America. A trip that she hopes will satisfy her sense of adventure.
I was kind of a rebel at times, my own idea about things. You know, when you're young and 25, the world doesn't seem so dangerous. I just wanted to see America.
Linda spends 2 weeks traveling over 2,000 miles across the country. But before she heads home, she wants to make the trip extra special with a final hike into the mighty Grand Canyon.
It was one of the places that I wanted to visit because it's one of the natural wonders of the world.
The Grand Canyon is known as an epic tourist destination, but it's also a popular place for hiking.
Come on.
Before she heads off into the canyon, Linda stops off at a local store to buy postcards and let her family know that she's fine.
On one of the postcards, I saw a set of waterfalls, and I thought, oh, you know, I'd like to see those. But I wasn't sure where you leave and what kind of a hike it was.
Do you know if there are any organized tours to the waterfalls?
No organized tours as such. If you drive up to the hilltop campsite, you can make your way down to the Supai village, and the falls are right down there.
Okay, that's good. Thanks.
So I wrote my postcards up, and I recall sending one off to my brother and sister-in-law.
To get to the waterfalls, Linda and Coco Jin must first drive to a staging post at the beginning of the hike.
I didn't know that it would take me as long as it did because it was, I think, maybe about 35 miles. But it was all dirt road, so it took me a couple of hours to get through that and to finally get to the hilltop.
By the time they get there, it's already lunchtime. It's late in the day to be setting off on a hike. But undeterred, Linda heads off into the valley.
Yeah, come on.
Yes, I was overwhelmed by the size and the enormity of it. It made me feel small.
Linda's backpack weighs over 20 pounds and is slowing her down.
I knew I could make better time without it because it was beginning to feel very heavy on my back.
Ditching the backpack will mean leaving behind her sleeping bag, food, and only supply of water.
I would have nothing except, you know, the clothes that I had on my back and a few items that I had in my purse.
With no experience of being out in the wild, Linda makes a terrible decision.
I thought I could always come back for it the following morning.
Coco.
My priority at that point in time was just to make it to the Indian reservation, make it somewhere safe before dark.
Hello!
But as night falls, Linda and Coco are just tiny specks in the vast canyon floor.
Yeah, I was totally alarmed with getting dark and not being where I needed to be. That was my realization that I wasn't on the right trail.
And with the light fading, Linda has no chance of retracing her steps to her backpack.
You start thinking about the worst sort of things that can happen and just kind of overcome by fear. The first night was devastating. It was very, very scary. You just can't see, other than the stars that are out. There's no artificial lighting of any kind.
As the temperature on the canyon floor plummets, Linda is totally unprotected against the cold.
In my backpack, I had my sleeping bag, and I had all my food supply and my water.
In the pitch black night, it's impossible for Linda to find her backpack.
So without that, I really had nothing to protect me from the elements and nothing to sustain me.
Her only source of comfort is her best friend, her pet dog, Coco Jin.
Coco Jin just stayed by me. I was thankful to have him because we could cuddle up with one another, and he would offer some warmth. I cried off and on, I think, the entire night, just out of fear and not knowing what was going to happen to me. I remember getting very, very hot. I was thirsty and I had nothing to eat or drink. My mouth was just terribly, terribly dry.
In these conditions, human beings need around 2 gallons of water a day.
My nurse's training told me that I needed to have water, that there was no way I was going to be able to survive without water. I knew I could live without food, but the water was going to be essential because it's so hot during the day down there. And I guess real fear set in at that point.
Coco, come on.
If I had been completely alone without the dog, I think I would have fallen apart.
Tired? Pretty tired right now.
I would talk to him. I'm sorry I got you into this, Coco. But we'll find our way out, trying to keep positive.
But by early evening, Linda realizes she and Coco Jin are still completely lost within the vast wilderness.
I knew I was going to be down there another night.
Now able to collect a few mouthfuls of water, Linda decides to hike away from the spring in search of a trail out of the canyon.
My new plan was to drink as much water as I could before I would set off that day so I would be hydrated, and then follow a trail and see where it would possibly lead to. As long as I can retrace my steps and get back to my water supply, because I knew that that was paramount.
For 5 days, Linda searches north, south, east, and west of her base. but each day ends in crushing disappointment. After 11 freezing nights out in the wilderness, a violent storm blows into the canyon.
I built a shelter for myself in between two rocks that came out of the sand, and then I took some of the shrubbery around and built a little roof on top.
But the makeshift shelter does little to keep off the torrential rain and provides no defense against the predators lurking in the undergrowth.
As I was trying to fall asleep, I heard some rustling. I became alert and threw a handful of sand in the direction that I thought I heard the sound. And then I heard a hissing sound.
Fearful of deadly rattlesnakes hiding in the bush, Linda is forced to abandon the shelter.
It was one of the toughest nights. There was thunder and lightning and a lot of rain, and it was very frightening down there because I didn't have any shelter. I was out in the open. It was definitely cold, and definitely that was a concern, the hypothermia.
Alone, miles from civilization, Linda knows she must find the mental strength to survive.
I started to think of ways to occupy my mind, and I said a rosary, and then I started to sing songs, just something to keep me occupied, to get me through that night.
Once more, Linda is alone. But following the horses has led her to a welcome sight.
I noticed pools of water, and I remember looking at it and seeing little insects or whatever swimming around in it, and I thought, well, I don't really have any other choice except to drink it because that's the only way I'm going to survive. The water was kind of bitter, but it was wet, and I knew it would get me through another day.
As night falls, Linda drifts in and out of consciousness and is haunted by nightmares and fear.
I had started having dreams of animals coming and eating out my eyes.
Now seriously malnourished, Linda is starting to fantasize about an end to her hunger.
I began thinking about food quite a bit. And so I would kind of just sit there on a rock, you know, and think about dinner menus, writing those out in my journal. Spare ribs and potatoes au gratin, tossed salad, and cauliflower with hollandaise sauce. So kind of vicariously, I was eating through my menus that I would write. I was sitting there resting, and I decided that I was going to brush my hair. For what purpose, I wasn't sure.
Almost 3 weeks after getting lost, Linda finally hears the sound she's been yearning for.
I can hear the wings going around, and I knew it was close.
Back in Pittsburgh, when Linda fails to arrive at work, her family finally realizes she's missing, and prompted by the postcard she sent them, they've triggered an aerial search of the canyon. It seems her ordeal is finally over. But Linda is impossible to see from the air.
It was devastating that they didn't see me, but I could figure out why.
Linda realizes that if she can't be seen from the air in the vast canyon, the chances are she'll never be found. Linda's brother and sister-in-law have now joined the search. But when they arrive at the campsite that Linda began her hike from, they're greeted with a sight that fills them with foreboding.
That's her car, right?
Yeah.
Linda's car has been broken into, but is still exactly where she left it almost 3 weeks ago.
We were told that there was virtually no chance that Linda would be alive if she were lost in the canyons. There wasn't much chance we could even find her body. We were on a gruesome kind of mission. The scary part was that all the canyons look the same, and they're not marked by anything except for an occasional old wooden sign.
They arrive at the same sign where Linda mistakenly turned right and out into the wilderness.
Which way do you think?
I don't know. Will I canyon? This way. Maybe.
Linda's brother and sister-in-law turn left towards the Supai village and away from where Linda remains stranded in the canyon.
I was afraid for Linda. The chance of survival after being lost in a place like that just seems so remote.
Mentally and physically exhausted and dangerously dehydrated, Linda finally gives up all hope of ever getting out alive. Now, death is her only way out.
My priority was to find a place where I could just fall asleep and then hopefully die in my sleep. I thought, this is probably going to be it. I remember lying down and thinking, if I could maybe just die in my sleep, that would be the most peaceful way to go. I thought, you know, if I don't make it out of here, my parents will never really know what happened. My mother had lost a brother, her baby brother. And, you know, here's a woman that had gone through a lot of trauma in her younger years. And to me, that was kind of devastating to think that they would be going through that.
After 19 days, battling to stay alive, Linda finally gives up.
I heard voices. And it was almost like, is it a figment of my imagination or is it for real?
Four Native Americans from the local village had noticed footprints in an area where tourists don't venture, and using traditional tracking methods, have managed to locate Linda in the vast canyon.
You could tell by the looks on their faces that they were kind of amazed to find me alive. It was just joyous.
And waiting for her in the nearby Indian village are her brother and sister-in-law.
She looked wonderful and she looked horrible. She was skeletal looking and she was the color of bricks from the canyon soil.
It was just very emotional. It was the best feeling in the world.
The three of us just grabbed each other and put our heads together and just howled, really. You know, the tears just flowed.
But then, for Linda, the best surprise of all. The locals have also found Coco Gin, wandering lost amidst the canyon.
That was a happy reunion, too. Yeah, I was very happy. There was a lot of things that I didn't do correctly, a lot of things, and I, to this day, can't figure out why. With all the big mistakes that I made, you know, how I was able to survive.
Despite her ordeal, Linda made a full recovery and went on to get married and raise a family.
I just didn't think it was my time to go. And that stayed with me, and the persistence and the will, the strong will to survive.